Good morning, Greater Bethel.
Good morning.
Keeping our history alive, featuring the AME Church in Indian Territory and in Africa. Greater Bethel AME Church, Reverend Michael Broadnax, pastor. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the AME Church in Indian Territory, and Kari will be talking about the AME Church in Africa. So, what was Indian Territory? In 1830, Congress passed and President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, which is pretty much what it sounds like. All Indians, well, most Indians east of the Mississippi River were moved to the modern state of Oklahoma, and they were given this land in exchange for their lands in east of the Mississippi. So Indian Territory originally included most of modern Oklahoma. However, in 1890, the Oklahoma Territory was organized, and this basically cut Indian Territory in half. So Indian Territory was in the eastern side of the area, and Oklahoma Territory was in the west. Then in 1907, Oklahoma became a state and subsumed all the Indian lands. So the Indian Territory was officially no more. So here's a map just to give you an idea of what it looked like in the 1890s. As you can see, Indian Territory is in the east, and that's where the AME Church had its churches. So we were primarily in the Cherokee lands, the Creek lands, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw. Who lived in Indian Territory? As I mentioned from the map, you would see the 5 civilized tribes of the southeast. Also, the former black slaves of these southeastern Indian tribes lived there as well. During the 1830s, these black slaves went with their Indian masters to the Oklahoma Territory and lived there after the Civil War and continued to build their families. Also living in Indian Territory were the Miami, Ottawa, Eastern Shawnee, and other groups. So now to the AME Church in Indian Territory. The AME Church founded the Indian Mission Conference in 1879, and their churches pretty much worked with several groups. One were the black Indians who had formerly been the slaves of the southeastern Indians, and they remained in Indian Territory and helped us to found these churches. Given that the AME Church is being founded on these Indian lands, they needed negotiators to help them facilitate this. So it's believed that black Indians helped them with that. So black Indians are attending our churches, as well as blacks from the South who were migrating to this area to escape the horrendous conditions there. By 1807, there were at least 70 AME churches in Indian Territory. After 1908, the Indian Mission Conference was disbanded and incorporated into the various Oklahoma conferences. So basically, the life of the AME Church in Indian Territory was from 1879 to 1908. Here are just some pictures to help you get an idea of what people might have looked like then. You see a handsome black Indian warrior, a beautiful woman in the middle, and a small child on the right. So now I'm going to briefly tell you about what the Indian Mission Conference looked like in 1900 and then 1907. So in 1900, this conference was divided into 5 districts: Muskogee, Fort Gibson, Ardmore, Tuskahoma, and Atoka. And these 5 districts contained 32 churches and 12 parsonages. It also had 15 traveling elders, 15 traveling deacons, 2 traveling preachers, and 32 local deacons. The conference also had 2 high schools, Blue Creek and Muskogee. So by 1907, which is pretty much the last year of the conference, it had grown to over 70 churches, up from 32. So the Muskogee district had 20 churches, the most successful being Muskogee Station, which had 236 members and was worth $10,000, a lot of money back then. A lot of money now. The Fort Gibson district had 15 churches. For example, Tahlequah Mission was located on Cherokee lands and had members like William and Angelina Edmondson. And these, again, probably would have been either black Indians or blacks who had migrated from the South. The Ardmore district had 14 churches, like Wewoka, which was located in the Seminole Nation. However, Clearview Circuit was located within an all-black town in the Creek Nation. And this church had members like the Johnson, Clark, Tolles, and Aikens families. The Tuskahoma district had 11 churches. One of these was Tishomingo, located in the Chickasaw Nation. And lastly, the Atoka district had 11 churches, with Atoka Station being located on Choctaw lands, having 47 members and being worth $1,500. So in conclusion, the Indian Mission Conference wasn't a huge conference in comparison to other areas, but it did have a significant number of members from diverse backgrounds, and it also had a good number of churches. So now I'll give it to Kari, who'll tell you about the AME Church in Africa.
Thank you, Christina. Okay, I'll be focusing, although it says Africa here, I'll be focusing mostly on South Africa and Liberia. How did we get to Africa in the first place? Even before slavery was abolished, there were questions surrounding what should we do with free blacks, and more so should we do with them after slavery, given that a lot of people thought that blacks and whites couldn't coexist in society together. So in 1817, the American Colonization Society forms, and it's based on this belief that blacks and whites could not coexist. And their goal was to expatriate African Americans to a colony that they formed named Liberia on the West African coast. They justified this deportation by claiming that African Americans would civilize and Christianize heathen Africans. In quotes. Okay. So Daniel Coker, founder of the AME Church, migrates with his wife to Sherbert Island in Liberia in 1820, and this creates a rift in the AME Church leadership between Richard Allen and Daniel Coker about colonization. Not everyone was on the same page. Some wanted to stay in America, some wanted to go to Africa. But in any case, the AME Church commissioned missionaries to Liberia in 1824, and women missionaries such as the AME Mite missionaries also went to Africa to proselytize. Okay. The AME Church in Liberia and South Africa. After the Civil War, African Methodism received its transatlantic dimension, mostly through the work of Henry McNeil Turner, who was a bishop in the AME Church. Turner was pretty much disillusioned with American society. He had been denied his seat in Georgia after the Civil War, and he was just like, no, I'm leaving. So he sought to build up a black nation in Africa that would serve the needs of talented African Americans. He sent 2 ships, totaling 500 or more immigrants, in 1895 and 1896 to Liberia. And churches were established in Liberia in 1891 and South Africa in 1896. Why was African Methodism, which was, an American formation, why was it so popular, or why did Africans take to it? In 1892, seemingly prophetic, 100 years since Richard Allen had walked out of the St. George's Church in Philadelphia to form the AME, a group of blacks did the same thing in Pretoria, South Africa. The dissenters came into contact with Bishop Turner, and in 1896, they were accepted in the AME Connection. In 1898, Turner spent 6 weeks organizing the South African Church in the Transvaal and in the Cape, ordaining 60 elders and deacons. The AME's presence, and especially that of Turner, a black bishop, offered South Africans some strong social and political capital. Okay, how did Africans and African Americans interact through the AME Church? African Americans had conceptions about African spirituality before they reached the continent. Bear in mind that their central mission, according to the white people in the colonization society, was to Christianize and civilize heathen Africans. African American and West Indians too brought Western notions of civility and culture to Africa, and despite their proclaimed Pan-Africanism, did not take African culture on its own terms. Many indeed consider Africans to be heathens, devoid of Christian morals, viewing them very much in the same way as European imperialists. And this, unfortunately, inhibited the cooperative possibilities between Africans, African Americans, and West Indians that could have furthered their various fights against white violence, oppression, colonialism, specifically Jim Crow in America and apartheid in South Africa. The politics of the AME Church in the urban Transvaal. It is believed that despite whatever conceptions African Americans and West Indians may have had about Africans, it is believed that the influx of these people into the urban Transvaal in the 19th century ushered in ideas that incited Africans against industrial oppressions that were brought on by Europeans. Black Americans in particular injected a newborn energy into South Africans. They added what a directing brain and organizing body to what had been previously disorganized African people. African Americans presented Africans with the spectacle of a black population undivided by language or ethnicity, thereby threatening one of the central props of white supremacy in Africa. Where Africans had once